year, I look forward to attending the CARILEC CEOs and Finance Conference. It is perhaps one of the most important fora put on by CARILEC, as it brings together those responsible for the strategic visioning and financing of a range of power-related and, yes, some water utilities in the region. More than that, though, I truly enjoy the opportunity to engage my fellow electric utility CEOs, their CFOs, and other industry partners in a more relaxing environment. And of course, the very interesting, to say the least, program of activities that is usually put together to ensure that we are not only engaged in serious discussions, talking shop, but also find some time for some real R&R, rest and relaxation. I am therefore extremely pleased to have been given the privilege to host this year's CEOs and Finance Conference. And we at CARILEC have been working really hard with CARILEC to plan a conference program that we hope will be stimulating, thought-provoking, relaxing, fun-filled, and thoroughly enjoyable as previous ones. We trust that you have come prepared for an exhilarating experience. This year's CEOs and Finance Conference is being held during a time of major transformation within the electric utility industry. The traditional business model of just selling kilowatt hours to customers is fast losing its validity. Expectations of the regulators, customers, and other stakeholders are changing frequently, and regulatory structures continue to evolve. These, we foresee, will likely lead to increases in costs for utilities unless emerging regulatory structures, business models, and technologies provide new and appropriate fit-to-purpose tools to help manage those costs. As new distributed energy resources, such as solar photovoltaics, to energy storage, to electric vehicles become more widespread in use, it is imperative that utilities find opportunities to tap into these resources in order to balance the grid, improve efficiency, boost reliability and resilience, and defer or avoid some of the cost of investment in new generation transmission and distribution assets over the medium term. Even as we grapple with these hard infrastructural issues, there are some softer issues that we must also address with some measure of urgency. A critical one at this juncture is the improvement of our capacities to protect against cyber risks, given that our grids are becoming increasingly digitized through the use of information and communication technologies. I am sure some of you would have heard or read about the warnings just this week on the latest ransomware virus that has been affecting computer systems around the world. So cyber risks are a very real threat. Equally important is the quality of our human capital required for the regeneration, no pun intended, of this industry that is transforming right before our eyes, calling for new modalities for managing these resources. These are just a snapshot of the issues that we expect to address our minds to during the conference and in the months ahead. They will, however, require a significant paradigm shift, possibly a complete 360-degree turnaround in our perspectives from visions of success trapped in the glory days of the past to a mindset of repositioning ourselves to become more enterprising and daring as we explore and exploit the diverse opportunities which lie ahead. But there will be time enough for all of that heavy stuff during the conference. For now, I encourage you to participate fully in all the activities that have been planned for you, both indoors and outdoors. We trust that the 2017 CARILEC CEOs and Finance Conference will exceed your expectations for both business and pleasure. Thank you for coming, and welcome to simply beautiful St. Lucia.
I'll start with a quote from Bob Dylan, not Bob Marley. Come, writers and critics who prophesy with your pen, and keep your eyes wide open, for the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel is still in spin, and there's no telling who it will be naming. For the loser now will be later to win, for the times they are changing, and we are in changing times. As I said, I wanted to start with a quote from Bob Marley, but when I looked at the theme, movement, utilities, people, and power technology, the only thing I could think of from Bob Marley was Exodus, movement of Jah people. And I didn't think it was quite appropriate for the occasion, so I had to go with a different Bob, so I went with Bob Dylan, okay? But I do think that the theme for the conference this year is really very current and truly on point, because there is movement, and a growing movement, in every sector and every facet of the utility industry, for the times they are changing. We see the landscape of the electric utility business changing before our very eyes. New players, new regulators, new regulations, new fuels, new plants, new competition, new utility models, ESCOs, smart grids, all these are popping up all over the place. And utilities can now lose their market share, not in big bites, but by 1,000 cuts of 5 kilowatt and 10 kilowatt small-scale generators that are being interconnected to the grid via solar panels. And the times they are changing. And we see changes in our people. We watch a lifetime employees being replaced by a workforce that is far more transient and less likely to stay with the company for the next 20 or 30 years, and to become the bedrock of institutional knowledge that the lifers were. And as we lose these bedrocks, pebbles suddenly look very attractive. And we see generation technology changing to where terms like base load are now considered to be made of 2 four-letter words. And terms like intermittency and non-dispatchable are no longer considered foul language, because the times are changing. We recall when distribution and generation were different areas of the business, but now we see them merging into distributed generation. And there is pros and cons to these, so it is not all bad. We see new investment in new generation facilities and welcome the new emphasis on the preservation of the planet's environment. New investments in the smart grid to cope with changes in the generation format and to facilitate the gathering of data and enable the evolution of electricity service companies and the advent of the prosumer and the demise of the consumer. Yes, there is movement. But even though the times are changing, there's also another saying. The more things change, the more they remain the same. For in the end, what is required now is what has always been required. That our quest now is the same as it always was, to deliver affordable electricity to the Caribbean people. For it is one of the essential elements needed for the betterment of the lives of our people in this region. But our responsibility is not only to the Caribbean. We need to play our role in preserving the environment of this planet that we call home. And as we move on, the legacy we should leave behind is that of being leaders, the innovators and the facilitators of that process that pilots us from where we are to that brighter tomorrow that we all desire and dream of. We need to work at establishing the relationships with the other stakeholders that will enable us to create a path to the energy industry of the future in which we continue to play a substantial part, albeit in roles yet undefined. We may not be the innovators in areas of technology here in the Caribbean, but we can be innovators in crafting the processes and the procedures, the rules and the regulations that govern the industry and transition to the new model in which utilities still have a role to play. And as we convene in our sessions over the next few days, let us join the movement of utilities, people, technologies, and investments who are working to create a better tomorrow for the peoples of the Caribbean and the world. I thank you very much. God bless you all.
We at Wärtsilä are very delighted to be the diamond sponsor for this year's CEO conference. I am personally thrilled that this conference is taking place here in St. Lucia under the auspices of CARILEC. And the reason being, when we launched a Caribbean Business Initiative in 1996, we had our very first contract with CARILEC for the 20 megawatt expansion at Cul-de-Sac. And that has grown to a 78 megawatt capacity. Needless to say, Wärtsilä and CARILEC are inextricably bound. And as one of our popular leaders would say today, it's a beautiful thing. Wärtsilä and CARILEC share many good memories. And over the last 21 years, we have had a history of good cooperation. Since 1996, we have been supporting CARILEC as a sponsor for both the CEO and engineering conferences. And I can tell you that we were a faithful sponsor in the early days when no one was interested in sponsoring these conferences. That has changed, and of course, it's a good thing. Wärtsilä today has an installed capacity of over 3,000 megawatts in the Caribbean region. Some 2,500 megawatts added over the last 17 years alone. We're very proud of this achievement, and I thank all of our customers for putting their trust in us. And turning to the present, I'm very pleased to announce that in March of this year, we had a new customer. We signed a contract with the U.S. Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority for a 21 megawatt propane-fired power plant, the first in the Caribbean region. The theme of this year's CARILEC conference is movement, utilities, people, technology, and investment. I would like to single out two words in this theme: technology and investment. Wärtsilä is a leader when it comes to developing new technologies, and no surprise, we are ahead in our field when it comes to the amount invested annually on research and development. Last year, Wärtsilä spent 131 million euros on R&D, representing approximately 2.7% of our net sales. And we had 54 patents for new inventions. As a result, new products and improvement to existing products are coming to the market, particularly in the areas of gas-fired reciprocating engines utilizing natural gas, LPG, and ethane, and coupled with that, efficiency improvements in our existing portfolio of generating sets. Wärtsilä has also stepped into the LNG market, offering complete turnkey solutions, EPC solutions, that is, for LNG terminals that encompass receiving, storage, and regasification infrastructure. We are in solar PV now, yes, and have offered hybrid energy solar power plants. We are also offering battery storage solutions. And my colleague, Risto Paladenius, I don't know if he's here, will be presenting on this topic, I think, tomorrow. We also just announced, just a few days ago, the acquisition of Greensmith Energy Management Systems, which is a US-based corporation and one of the leading companies in intelligent energy storage technology, and is well known in the US and internationally for its integration software. So there are exciting times ahead, so please stay tuned. At this juncture, I would like to recognize my colleagues, Edmund Phillips, who works with me as a business development manager for the region. I don't know if he's here. Mark Tarbox, who heads up Puerto Rico Service Office. Can you stand, Mark? Take a bow. And Risto Paladinius, if he's here. Can you stand? Okay, I don't see him, but Risto is from a Helsinki office who is here to make a presentation, as I said before, on battery storage systems. I also want to take the opportunity to thank our marketing coordinator, Michelle Romero, who is based in the Houston office, who has worked tirelessly with the CARILEC Secretariat in order to fulfill our sponsorship duties. Is Michelle here? Okay. In closing, let me say that quite a number of us here, I think, are aware of how long it took to bring together this diverse group encompassing electric utilities that span the English, French, and Dutch Caribbean. CARILEC remains a vibrant fixture in the energy environment in our region, and we must ensure its continued existence. As an associate member, Wärtsilä will not falter in its support for CARILEC, and I am sure my fellow associate members share my sentiments. Thank you very much.
I will promise you one thing, that my voice is nothing like my colleague who has finished his rendition, so it's always a difficult act to follow music, but nonetheless I shall try to speak as well as he played. The fact is that the leadership role that CARILEC has played in the energy sector, in acknowledging that the winds of change have arisen, is one that must be commended. Indeed, CARILEC has partnered with the CARICOM Secretariat on a number of occasions, and we are still in the process of improving that partnership as it regards leading the energy agenda within the region and the transformation of the energy sector that is required to support our sustainable development. The theme of this CEO and Finance Officers Conference, Chief Financial Officers Conference, is one which is indeed indicative of the leadership role and the forward-thinking approach that CARILEC has taken to the energy sector. Looking at movement, utilities, people, technology, and investment, it's really one that defines much of what is required for the transformation that we are pursuing. Whether we define movement as the art of shifting from one position to another, or if we define movement as the heterogeneous group of people we sometimes associate towards focusing on a generalized common goal, it means that really where energy is concerned, we are in a state of motion. The theme is indicative of the fact that the energy sector is perhaps at its most dynamic state yet in the last 100 years. And in particular, for those of us like myself who are pure scientists, we know that energy and motion are synonymous. In the context of the sciences of equilibria, which defines a majority of the chemical and physical interactions from which energy arise, there is a dynamic process that we refer to as a steady state process, in which what you have is a constant flux of motion but with a net effect where there appears to be no change. So movement and energy are synonymous terms. The energy movement, as I will describe it this evening before you, trying to of course, be as succinct as possible, because the winds of change have also come on me, Mr. Cove. I am trying to speak briefly this evening. I'm not known very well for speaking briefly, so I'm sticking to the winds of change. And I shall certainly, so as not to detain you from your further drinks, be brief. So in terms of the energy movement, what I will define as being the important pieces is the shifting of the energy architecture from one that is designed around cheap oil to satisfy the legacy needs of the colonial outposts of the island states, of which the Caribbean is one such set. As a result of that, we have energy systems that have been supply-driven and that support what we consider to be limited services and limited industries as they were designed during the 60s and the 70s. And now we are in the process wherein we must make our energy systems one that is capable of supporting our sustainable development agenda. We recognize that small island developing states such as ours are vulnerable to the effects of climate change. All small island states have been identified, and the Caribbean in particular has been the most vulnerable towards to the impacts of climate change by the IPC reports, especially the AR5, which has identified the Caribbean as having the single biggest loss that it would, of all the countries in the world as a region when it comes down to the potential impacts of climate change. And so the collective efforts of our people and our governments, our private sector, our society, our industries, our experts, consumers, we must all agree and work towards the goals of utilizing energy towards our sustainable development solutions. So no longer should energy be simply an end in itself, but really an end, means to an end. And the collective efforts is the second part of that movement, the movement of how it is that we organize ourselves, with the utility being one key player to bring about that transformation that we require is really a critical part of that energy movement. So it's not just the utility itself that is moving, but the energy sector in totality. In addressing the energy movement and dealing with transformation, there are a number of things that we must deal with, many of which I believe remain relatively undefined. We speak about energy being the key issue that underpins our sustainable development goals. But if one looks at the global sustainable development goals as they are derived from the UN system, there are 17 goals, such goals, of which energy is goal number 7. But when one looks at the indicators that define these goals, there are over 163. They have now whittled it down to 163 indicators. The question is, within the context of a country like St. Lucia, for instance, what is really the basket of characteristics that defines when St. Lucia reaches a state of sustainability? Does anyone in the room know that? Are we not going to be required to identify exactly what are the characteristics of sustainability within our respective island states? And by doing that, wouldn't we then be in a better position to identify exactly how we can architect our energy system to provide the right kind of services to meet those characteristics that define our sustainability? Do we know when we would have reached these, how do we know when we would have reached these states of sustainability unless we clearly define them? And this is a challenge that we face and that we must deal with as part of any endeavor towards transformation of our energy systems and any other system for that matter. The fact is that we must identify too what kind of capacity is going to be required. And I'm not talking about generation capacity, but human capacity and institutional capacity is going to be required for us to be able to plan and identify the appropriate types of technologies that are going to support the sustainable agenda that we choose or that we agree on. And when we have identified that capacity, it is going to be important that we not simply train our people, but that we also utilize them towards the planning process. Too often, we have sent persons abroad, we have trained them here in the region also, and in the process of building the capacity of our people, we have not utilized them towards the transformation that we desire. Very often we find that young persons coming out of universities, coming out of colleges, who are trained with resources from the region, end up being sidelined, and their skills that we have imparted them with, in many instances, at much great cost, are not being utilized even as part of the decision support process. And so it is going to be important that if we are going to be driving this transformation, as we are talking about movement and we are talking about utilities and people, that we find a way of ensuring that whatever we do with our people in building their capacity, that that capacity is made to impact on what it is that we desire. And when we have done that, we will be able to identify the kinds of technologies that are necessary for us to build the energy systems that are going to support the sustainable development. You know, we are going to be spending time over the next 3 or 4 days talking about a lot of the technical issues and a lot of the technological issues. So I'm not going to spend tonight talking about the smart grids and all the opportunities and why it is that we shouldn't start looking at solar and PV and wind as our first and only options when we are talking about energy, but that we really should look first at what are the services that our sectors desire and how do we best deliver those services to those sectors. Not just electricity, but rather energy services. Because in many instances, the services are actually more efficiently delivered through other means than electricity, which is one of the energy carriers that are available to us. I'm not going to speak about even the issues related to some of the innovations, not just the engineering innovations, but also the kinds of financial innovations that are necessary for us to be able to afford the kinds of technologies that are important to our transformation of an energy system that can support our sustainable development. The fact is that some of the work that we have done so far in the Secretariat suggests that around $20 billion is going to be required over the next decade if we are to change our system to one where we are able to integrate up to 50% of our indigenous renewable energy resources into our energy architecture. And that includes also some of the monies that will be required to upgrade and modernize the grid infrastructure so that we can deliver those energy services from the points where they are produced to where it is that the demand centers lie. I'm not going to speak even today about some of the energy trade issues, some of the mismatches that exist within the countries where there seems to be a significant amount of cost-effective energy potential that is renewable, and the fact that these energy sources would have been best developed if it is that we were able to move those energy, those molecules from where they are, or the energy that is being produced from where they are to the centers that have greater demand, and how we can go about building that within a more robust CSME or CARICOM single market and economic context. That's a discussion for another day. What I'm going to speak about is the fact that the integrated planning process is one that is lacking in the region and that is required to bring all of this together. The integrated planning process is one that requires not just the IRP, which looks at the re-evaluation of the utility business, but also one that conjoins with the overall integrated energy planning process that looks at the service needs of the different sectors, transport, agriculture, industry, so that we no longer build power plants in places where the waste heat cannot be recovered and utilized to support industrial processes, so that we no longer build power plants without thinking of the potential impacts that the effects of climate and sea level rise and meteorological events could have on these areas where some of these plants and substations and infrastructure have been located. Because at the end of the day, we must begin to plan not within the context of simply where the demand centers are and where it's easiest to generate, but really how the big picture looks. How does everything come together? And how is it that we are going to get the best mix and match of our technology deployment that will give us the kind of sustainable development which will include the economics, the environmental, the social, and obviously the other undercurrents that are necessary for us to maximize those opportunities. Because too often we find that an overfocus on one area has led to what one could call almost a killing in other areas. The fact is that if we are going to be talking about IRPs, we need to understand IRPs in the context too of the fluctuating and the likely changing demand side issues, including the distributed generation issues. We need to understand IRPs within the context of the services that are potentially being provided and offered by those who are providing energy services that are non-electrical, such as seawater air conditioning, such as solar cooling, and such as solar thermal heating. Because there are real opportunities and there are investors there who will make use of these opportunities. And unless we integrate all of these service planning provisions together and not run with one without taking into account the context of the other, we are going to end up where we'll have more frictions and we'll continue to have the different disparities between what the utilities are doing and what the society at large requires. The utility has to be therefore at the center of the planning process because the utility is central to the backbone of the energy systems that we have in the region, which is the electricity sector. The utility also has the greatest amount of human capacity and knowledge with respect to much of the energy skills that we have in the region. So it is going to be important for all governments, for all players to recognize the critical role of the utilities in planning the energy future that we desire. And that is why the CARICOM Secretariat has taken the decision that we will lead from the regional level. And we have been working very closely with CARILEC. And we have been working with CARILEC on identifying some of the right types and issues regarding regulations that are important for us to be able to move incrementally some of those energy systems that we desire. We have been identifying with CARILEC too how we can build the right kind of robust information and knowledge network that will ensure that those of us who are planning are given the right kind of information and knowledge to plan with. Nothing is worse than planning in an environment where we do not have judicious scientific data. We end up in a situation sometimes where we can do more harm from the planning process than good if we plan without having the right tools. And we are working therefore with CARILEC to establish, through a memorandum of understanding, a process through which CARICOM, as the CARICOM Secretariat, as a representative of governments in the region, will work with the Utility Association to share and enhance its cooperation on not just knowledge and information, but also in pursuing some of those joint opportunities that can lead to some of the transformations that we desire. And that includes work that we are currently undertaking on looking at things like integrated utility service models that could potentially utilize unbilled financing for energy efficiency and other demand side activities so that we end up in the kind of state where persons who are desirous of making that transformation at the micro level can do so even if they cannot afford to do so because they don't have the money in their pocket to pay for it at once. In the same way in which a household helper can walk into courts and walk out with a brand new living room set of furniture without paying $0 down, we believe that if properly designed, the integrated utility service model will allow customers to do an entire suite of transformations within their respective buildings or their structures without having to find the money to finance upfront. And we believe in the last part of the discussion that the investments are there to make that happen. And we are working with the utilities in the region, and JPS has been one of the forefront forerunners in this, and BLNP, so I noticed Peter and Kelly are sitting next to each other. We are actually piloting this program with JPS and BLNP, in fact, with the support of the German government. So, ladies and gentlemen, so as not to bore you any longer, because I don't have the wonderful voice of my steel fan colleague, and I don't have the sticks to enhance what I'm saying either. And Minister King will be coming to give you even more than I can. I will end really by saying that in the process of transformation, it's going to be important that we define clearly what it is that our sustainable development needs are and how the energy systems that we are building can support those sustainable development needs, and the path of transformation that will take us from where we are with a 50-year-old legacy system to that which will give us the energy future that we want. It's really a question, ladies and gentlemen, of how far and how fast. Thank you very much.
I'm just returning from one of our out districts, village on the West Coast, some mere 1.5 hour drive from this point here, where today the government is signing a World Bank agreement to reconstruct a portion of one of our secondary schools, which was damaged by Hurricane Thomas and which was rendered structurally unsound. Interestingly and coincidentally is the fact that in that little village of probably just about 10,000 citizens, a group of students headed by the school teacher developed a group of innovators who have been very successful in attracting international funding for innovation and the implementation of a solar project to generate energy to households in that community. And so there are about 10 households that they've identified for which they have designed and developed the project, for which the National Utility Regulatory Commission here in St. Lucia has approved the projects and they have granted permission for the implementation of 6, 4 pending based on matters of land title. But certainly a very promising and very exciting activity in a rural district that probably years ago would never imagine that innovation would have extended and would have moved so quickly beyond the boundaries of the city into the rural communities where young men and young women, through their own innovation and the efforts at discovery, have been able to blaze the trail for other young St. Lucians and St. Lucians generally who wish to look into the direction of sustainable energy, renewable energy, and development. But I must admit that this CARILEC Chief Executive Officers and Finance Officers Conference is indeed, as you know, the premier annual networking and information sharing event for utility CEOs and CFOs in the Caribbean region, Central and South Americas. I'm also aware that the event is one of 4 annual conferences specifically geared to creating opportunities to build capacity in the region, share knowledge, gain better exposure in the region, and provide valuable networking opportunities for its membership. As Minister with the responsibility for energy in St. Lucia, It gives me a great satisfaction that this prestigious event is being held here in St. Lucia. The theme under which this conference is being held, movement, utilities, technology, people, and investment, is a most relevant and commendable choice. It connotes realism, depth, and a purposeful interdependence among the success pillars of the energy sector, which presents the opportunity for innovation and creativity. Therefore, to gather and sustain any positive momentum in the energy sector, these dimensions must be skillfully interwoven. There is an understanding that the utility fuels the infrastructure, facilities, and electricity to bolster economic growth, which includes government transactions, competitiveness in all industries, tourism development, agriculture, education, and healthcare, residential comfort, and access to modern amenities, just to name a few. Technology is leveraged to provide affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. However, the right technology must be utilized, especially in small island economies as ours, where there must be the right fit, and it must be appropriate for the purpose. There are two schools of thought, though. One which notes that the region should not be used as an experimental ground or grounds, since we are just too small to fail. But there's another which says, and which promulgates, that an entire small island state is in itself a sample for experimentation. And if successful, the entire state stands to benefit. Enhancing technology with correctness and precision will minimize errors and allow for rapid acceleration towards meeting our renewable energy targets and fulfilling our nationally determined contributions as committed to under the Paris Agreement. In the case of St. Lucia, we committed to renewable energy penetration of 35% by the year 2020 and NDC targets of 16% by the year 2023 and 50% by the year 2030. There must be, therefore, a people-centric approach, with the focus being placed on the recipient, the customer, the client. The outlook should not be purely profit-driven. The services provided are to improve the quality of lives of all national and global citizens. One cannot put a price on good or excellent service. Investments are critical to expansion and maintenance of facilities. They keep the utility service standards above par and allow for modern utility operations. Nonetheless, investments must be made with timeliness, that is at the point where it is required, and they must be relevant, meaning that the interventions must be made in areas of utility operation that provide optimal benefit to all. Indeed, forming the nexus and connecting the links of the pillars of success creates a value chain that signals industry growth for CARILEC members that endorse this theme. The convening of this conference provides a conducive forum for members to undertake contextual analysis and to strategically and collaboratively fend off some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that members face in common. These may range from archaic infrastructure and the reliance of fossil fuel generation. Our challenge may be the perplexing puzzle of transitioning to renewables and the uncertainties that wait. It may be attracting investment and investment finance to undertake reform and modernization while attempting to keep tariffs low and avoiding erosion of the utility bottom line. Additionally, it may be the opportunity for conforming to regulation, which is fairly new for many Caribbean electric utility companies, particularly in the region, St. Lucia being no exception. In unity, there is strength, and CARILEC has grown from strength to strength. Each passing year, membership keeps widening, and I note now that there are 106 members, with 35 full members, 66 associate members, and 4 affiliate members. This bears testimony to the significance, relevance, and good work of CARILEC. In this same spirit, I wish to charge you with the responsibility of pushing the boundaries of the energy sector. Let us build a conducive energy space, one that is inclusive, not exclusive, one that is sustainable, and one that utilizes clean energy. The focus is on member objectives, but the broader focus should also be on the national, regional, and global development goals. I therefore wish to take this opportunity to recognize the arduous work of the organizers, including CARILEC and LUSLEC, and other members, wishing that all your efforts are being rewarded and that this conference surpasses all your expectations. I would like to wish all of you participants successful and fruitful deliberations in the coming days. May there be many positive outcomes and that the objectives of this 2017 conference are fully achieved under the theme Movement, Utilities, Technology, People, and Investment. And so with those few words, let me, in my capacity as Minister responsible for energy in St. Lucia, formally declare this CARILEC Chief Executive Officers and Chief Finance Officers Conference officially open. I thank you.